it's a dangerous trend in the wrong direction. As long as people are not committing crimes, as long as they're not violent, property damage, assault, uttering threats, arson, as long as there's none of the criminal stuff going on, really there shouldn't be any restrictions. And I think the City of Calgary injunction is an attempt to intimidate people. The city has always had the power by way of the police to issue tickets for, littering or for noise violations, bylaw violations, traffic infractions. And the fact that they would go for an injunction is it's a sick intimidation effort, because the difference is now police can immediately arrest and handcuff people, whereas without the injunction, they could only issue tickets.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News, and we are in Olympic Plaza here in Calgary. The protests that have been taking place for 2 years entirely peacefully over the last few weeks have escalated into violence, ultimately some conflicts and arrests. It all started when counter-protesters showed up and effectively blocked the ongoing peaceful marches that had been taking place over and over for years without incident. After that, the mayor of the city, GOT Gondek, weighed in and said that those people, the counter-protesters who were disobeying police, were in fact in the right, and these counter-protesters should not be allowed to march through the Beltline. The following week, they obtained an injunction against protests taking place in parks. So these protesters made their way to City Hall to protest there. Today, they intended to gather once again in City Hall, but an impromptu flag-raising ceremony has apparently been announced at City Hall, so they are now forced to gather here in Olympic Plaza. It remains to be seen what will happen throughout the day. As we've mentioned, there has been escalation from the mayor's office, from Calgary Police, as well as from aggressive counter-protesters that the police chief has admitted many of them are paid protesters. So we will be here throughout the day covering this protest and keeping you updated on the latest situation as it unfolds. I just wanted to ask you guys, we have seen efforts from the mayor's office, enforcement from police, even violence from counter-protesters, trying to subdue your capacity to carry on peaceful protests that have been going on for 2 years. What do you make of those efforts?
We're not into that. We're not into stooping to that level, right? We just want to be heard. We want it to be known that, this overreach, these mandates, we're the only country in the world that's still this strict, that it's over with. It should be over with, right? And stooping to their level of attacking people, we're not into that.
Yeah.
Right? We just, look, we have our kids here. Yeah. Right? And this is what we're doing it for, is for them, or else what's going to be left, right?
One of the great things about Canada, one of the things that many people, in fact, move to this country for, is the freedoms that we are assured. Many people don't realize that these freedoms in our country are considered privileges and many times dreams in other countries. But with politicians like Justin Trudeau and Mayor GOT Gondek, those freedoms are rapidly evaporating and people are losing their opportunities to protest. But these folks, despite pressures from politicians, are not backing down. They continue to gather and they continue to protest, exercising their fundamental Canadian rights. What do you think about politicians saying certain groups have a right to protest and other groups don't, them making that decision?
See, right there, that's so wrong, because if we don't follow their narrative, what are we called? Yeah. And we should be able to have an opinion on what we want to do and what Canada is. Like, her dad goes away for 2 weeks at a time. It's none of the government's business or whatnot, whatever goes on in our household. Yeah. And it's just like, enough. Like, we're not in your business, stay out of ours, right?
Well, we are now in a park adjacent to the Calgary Courts. The protesters had originally attempted to gather at City Hall, but City Hall apparently scheduled an impromptu and apparently non-existent flag-raising ceremony, excluding them from attending there. They then made their way to Olympic Plaza, where they were told, despite originally being promised they could use amplification technology, that would no longer be allowed. So they decided to come here to this park adjacent to the courts, their logic seemingly being that this is provincial jurisdiction and therefore the city doesn't have authority to enforce. I don't know if that's true. There does tend to be sheriffs here, but we are also seeing police presence, so it remains to be seen if that is true. But for the time being, the crowd is gathering here in the park adjacent to the courts. So I just wanted to ask you, the protesters are doing their best, endeavoring to gather peacefully, obeying traffic rules, but they keep having to move. Does this just seem like further efforts to remove their rights to protest?
Yeah, 100%. And just like true Albertans and true Canadians, we pivot. So you take one thing away, well, we'll just move this direction to do something else. You can't stop us.
And do you think it speaks to just how fundamentally peaceful this is, that they aren't trying to start a fight, they aren't trying to cause a confrontation? They're like, hey, we'll go somewhere else. We're going to stay peaceful. We're going to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. As you can see, I have peace and love on my balloons. So I'm not here to start anything. I'm just here to support my country.
I think it's ridiculous. Honestly, government should have no say in who can say what, like who can express their own opinions, right? It should be a freedom, a right for all citizens to say what they want and say how they feel and express what they're thinking about any sort of topic. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's vaccines or civil rights. Even like the guy doing the speech earlier was saying, Aboriginal rights, they have the right to express their feelings too. Every single Canadian should be able to do that. That's my opinion.
And what do you make of the persistence and the sort of efforts of these people who are uncompromising? They're following the rules, they're peaceful, but they're uncompromising in their stand for freedom.
I think it's awesome. I think if we don't take a stand and continue to take a stand, then they're just going to continue to come in and try and remove our freedoms. So we got to do, hold the line.
So as you can see, the police are trying everything possible to try and get these folks on a technicality. The officer behind me here has a decibel reader. They're trying to get people on every single technicality possible to undermine their right to protest and to voice their opinions.
It's ludicrous, and the tighter they grip, the more we shall slip, and freedom will always find a way.
Well, we have the right to protest. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think they are looking for antagonism, however it happens, as a reason or an excuse to push us away from our right to protest. And whatever that issue may be, everyone has that right. It doesn't work for one group of people for their cause and not for another group of people for their cause. That's not how it works.
Yeah, there certainly needs to be just and even application of the law. We're not seeing that, unfortunately. It's sad to see. We saw the Ottawa protests, the original police chief doing a pretty good job of keeping things peaceful. He was shown the road, and then the next police chief escalated things rapidly. GOT Gondek seemingly encouraging Chief Mark Neufeld to escalate things, to enact enforcement, to make otherwise peaceful protests ultimately violent. What do you make of this? There's so much rhetoric out there about de-escalation, and that's not what we're seeing from police.
That's correct. It's not what we're seeing. We are, in fact, seeing escalation in different forms, incrementally. It was mentioned on stage earlier that we are seeing a mini Ottawa situation unfolding, which is truly unfortunate. They are looking for cause. Like I said, any antagonist. They're choosing to escalate. Yeah. And we have to remain peaceful. That's the bottom line. That's the key to win. So,
fortunately, we have a large team here today. Cian and Sid have been covering the enforcement action, any conflicts with counter-protesters very closely, but we just want to show you that there is a significant police presence here today. Again, part of the ongoing escalation and efforts to subdue and ultimately deprive these people of their rights to protest. So I just wanted to touch base with you. From a constitutional perspective, people do have a right to gather, have a right to protest, but it seems everyone from the police chief to Mayor GOT Gondek to the counter-protesters are trying to stifle that right. These people are going through loops just to be able to have their voices heard. What are you seeing out here today?
Well, it's a dangerous trend in the wrong direction. As long as people are not committing crimes, as long as they're not violent, property damage, assault, uttering threats, arson, as long as there's none of the criminal stuff going on, really there shouldn't be any restrictions. And I think the City of Calgary injunction is an attempt to intimidate people. The city has always had the power by way of the police to issue tickets for, littering or for noise violations, bylaw violations, traffic infractions. And the fact that they would go for an injunction is it's a sick intimidation effort, because the difference is now police can immediately arrest and handcuff people, whereas without the injunction, they could only issue tickets. So it's really escalating it unnecessarily without any evidence that the ordinary law enforcement was not effective.
And so the other question that I kind of wouldn't mind, and maybe not necessarily constitutional, but political, is politicians seem to be making an effort to decide who can protest. BLM, pro-Palestine, that's all fine. Whatever group you're with, that's fine. But if you're a freedom protester or an anti-mandate protester, the mayor flat out came out and said that those people shouldn't have their voices heard. Do politicians have a place deciding what kind of protest is valid?
Not in a free society. In a free society, the government cares only that your protests be peaceful, not violent, that you're not disrupting economic activity, you're not disrupting businesses, you're not interfering with other people leading their lives, going about their business. So the government should only care about the behavior of the protest, and the government should be 100% neutral on the content. And so it's very twisted in Canada, where you had 2 years ago, February, March of 2020, you had, in the name of Aboriginal rights, in the name of the environment, you had protesters shutting down railway lines. And the Prime Minister says, oh yeah, we should just sit down and negotiate, when they were actually breaking the law, because that is, to block roads or railway lines is a criminal code offense. And then 2 years later, you have peaceful truckers in Ottawa who are not obstructing. You can still get from point A to point B within the city, and the Prime Minister invokes the Emergencies Act. That is a very scary departure from the rule of law, when governments actually take sides in liking or disliking your cause.
Well, it's a troubling precedent, and it's additionally troubling to see Mayor G.O.T. Gondek following in the suit of radical and militarized enforcement, while we've seen absolutely no criminal offenses, virtually no confrontations, and generally peaceful protests here in Calgary. John, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Is this where they're allowed to be? They're
allowed to be here. Yeah.
So this is all kosher. Okay.
Oh yeah, this one's fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I just went over and spoke with the police to confirm that indeed the protest here is legal, in compliance, not in violation of the injunction, and that the amplification is in fact permitted as well. So everything happening today entirely peaceful and entirely legal, as confirmed by Calgary police. A bunch of people were just telling us that some other protesters were coming and there was arrests. Is that accurate? Like, apparently a group of other protesters were coming from Princess Island Park and someone was arrested. Is there any truth?
There was a second.
Okay, was there an arrest or something? There was an arrest made. Okay, are they still sort of coming, do you know, or?
Not sure what the second. I think that might be the dribs and drabs even right there.
Okay, so there was another group of protesters at Princess Island Park. They were gradually making their way over here to join the larger protest. They were having a separate protest against mandates and restrictions as well. And we just had confirmation from the police that one person was arrested. Rumors are that that individual who was arrested was Chris Skye. So the protest is wrapping up here. As you can see, once again, entirely peaceful, no conflicts. The counter-protesters did not show up here today. They did not engage. There was no escalation. Police, once again, remained on the outskirts. We're going to remain around today in case people do arrive, but it is abundantly clear to anyone here that these people are going to continue to peacefully fight for their freedoms despite the government's efforts to suppress their right to protest. These people are simply not going anywhere. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos. Well, the counter-protesters, the efforts of the mayor's office, and the enforcement by police are not only limiting people's capacity to protest, it's also making our job as journalists rather challenging. In order to actually be out here protesting, we have to hire security guards to keep us safe because of the violence and escalation that we have seen. If you want to support our journalism and help us pay for those security guards, you can do so by visiting rebelfieldreports.com.